Adonai Kito. Hodu Adonai Kito. Hodu, 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 hodu. Hodu Adonai Kito. Shalom, shalom, shalom. Oh, peace, peace to you. Well, my name is Mary. I'm one of the many Marys in Jesus' life. I like to think that I'm his favorite, but, I'm sure everyone's beloved of Jesus. But Mary, I ask of myself, what is your story? If you know of Mary Magdalene from the biographies of Jesus, I play a very central role. I first met Jesus about a year into his ministry. He had already been healing all kinds of people, lepers and people with demons. And that is really what I needed most. You see, back in those days, it's hard for me to even remember, but I had 7 evil spirits, 7 demons, 7 illnesses. I was a mess. Oh, let me tell you, was I a mess. I was in so much pain, I couldn't even get my head around what I could do, and I had gone to see everyone I knew. Finally, I heard that this Jesus healed people. Because he healed people, I wanted to go see him. I lived next to Galilee, and so I traveled that day with some friends to see Jesus. And what was so remarkable about it was that there were so many people there to be healed. Oh, I shrank back. There were so many people there waiting to be healed that I really didn't even think there was going to be time for him to see me. Oh, I was so sick. So I went up, and Jesus looked at me like he looked at every other person that he has healed. And Jesus looked at me and said, "What is it that you want me to do for you?" He asked that question a lot of everyone as far as getting their permission for what they wanted to have done. All I could do was say, I want peace. I want peace in my body. I want peace in my mind. I was so plagued with demons. I wanted peace in how I saw everything. I wanted peace. I remember he took my hand, and I was healed. So many have asked me, what was that like? What did the healing feel like? And I don't know if you've ever had a God experience. If you've ever had a God experience, you know that you really can't answer that question. Words fail us, don't they, when we have that God experience? I've talked to many of my friends, and they say sometimes their God experience happens when they're baptized. Sometimes it happens as a child. Sometimes it happens when they're sharing the bread and the cup. Sometimes it happens when they're singing a hymn. But if you've ever had this God experience, and I pray you have, you can't really describe it. I think if you tried to, people would think we're crazy. And there's probably a little bit of that, especially in me. But after that, I was never the same again. I started following Jesus and his friends. Oh, his friends. Oh, let me tell you. Bless their hearts. And I mean that in all the meanings of bless their hearts. Bless their hearts. A lot of us traveled together. I made many friends with the women disciples, the women friends of Jesus. You know, a lot of us had our own means. We were somewhat well-to-do, and we would contribute to the welfare and the being and all the provisions of this traveling band of men and women. Now, thankfully, we had some other Marys there who were mothers of the disciples, some of the younger disciples. Their moms went with them. That was really a good influence. I'm glad they were there. But there were a lot of us, and I became very good friends with Joanna. Her husband worked in Herod's household. Can you imagine that? Here one of my dear friends becomes the wife of someone who works for Herod in this occupied country. I can't even imagine it. Dear friend of mine, and Susanna, oh, she was a hoot, let me tell you. I'm glad that we had this traveling band. And for the next 2 years, we traveled with Jesus. Oh, we had such laughter. A lot of people don't know how funny Jesus was in his earthly body. I think it's one of the many reasons that he was invited to so many dinner parties. I mean, Jesus, can he tell a story? Oh my word, and get a little wine in all of them? Oh my. The laughter still echoes in my heart. That joy. But what I learned in those 2 years of traveling with Jesus was that we should take him at his word. We didn't listen very well while we were traveling. When he says to abide in him, abide. What does that mean, abide? In Greek, the word is meno. This abide, and especially abide in the kingdom of heaven. Abide in Adonai. Abide in this magnificent mystery of life. It was hard for us to understand what that meant when we were traveling with him. Only in hindsight, after the betrayals, in the crucifixion, and his resurrection, did we begin to know what he meant. I told some of my friends that I was going to visit with you today through the magic of imagination and the magic of biblical scholarship that we have available. And I asked them, what should I tell them about myself? What should they know about Mary Magdalene? My friend said, well, we think that Jesus would say, and this is what we would say, is that you're pretty good in a crisis. When there's suffering around, they would say that I'm your person. Maybe there were some gifts of having all those demons and all that suffering early in my life. Maybe it was the Jesus healing that let me learn how to stand with suffering, to be with it, to not try to fix it, to try to bring the peace of Jesus, the peace of God, into a situation. I'm glad that my friends described me as that. I needed every bit of that during the crucifixion. See, it was the women, me and my friend Joanna and Susanna and the Marys, we were there. Jesus' mother was there, and that horrible, horrible day. If you've ever had profound suffering, many of us know that. And if you don't know it yet, you will know it. We all take our turns. But I was thankful that I could still stay standing there. Nothing to be said in real suffering, is there? Especially Jesus's, your beloved. Nothing to be said. Just stand there. And when he cried out, and when the sky turned black, And the ground shook, and the centurions, the Roman soldiers there said, "Surely he must be the Son of God." We all knew that to be true, and yet we were suffering such profound suffering. The other disciples had all fled. I understand that. It was too much for them. I know I have fled in my life from the face of suffering. I think it's something that we grow into. It's something that the God knows a lot about. Christ knows firsthand. So when Joseph of Arimathea came to take Jesus' body down, and Nicodemus, he was there too, when they took Jesus' lifeless body down from the cross and went to put it into a fresh tomb, we followed him. Me and all the women, we followed, and we watched. See, it was Sabbath, and we were going to practice the Sabbath. It's what Jesus did. And we were going to follow Jesus. He told us to follow him, so he practiced the Sabbath, and even though his body was lifeless, we were too. So that day we spent, I didn't know I could cry so much. I didn't know. The next morning when we wake up, and many of us go to the tomb, and then we go to the tomb again, Jesus is not there. We run to tell the disciples, he's not there. They didn't believe us. And so I went back just by myself, just to wait and to sit. And I heard a voice of, "Why are you crying?" And I turn, and I don't recognize the person in front of me until he says my name. Jesus says my name, Mary. He tells me not to hold on to him because, of course, I just want to embrace him, but to go tell the other disciples. It is time for them to go ahead, to do everything that he's told us to do. Can you imagine my absolute overjoyed self? That's the heart of my story of my time with Jesus' earthly presence. But for all of us, don't we all have our own stories, our God experience? Maybe we're looking for a God experience. I was when I sought Jesus to heal me. You know, I think of all of the reasons that people don't seek the living God, don't seek Jesus, don't seek Christ. I think of all those reasons, and I saw it in those days afterwards of why don't people continue to take Jesus at his word, to follow him, to meditate on what he says and how he lived his life. Talked a lot to Peter about this and to his other friends. And I think the very first reason is that we forget, don't we? We forget. You know, our suffering, maybe it diminishes, maybe we've been healed, and we forget God's goodness. We forget the transformation that happens all around us when we are healed. That's what Peter said, was he just forgot. He forgot whose he was. I pray I do not forget. That is my biggest fear, is that I will forget that the kingdom of heaven, as Jesus said, is inside each of us. That we are to embody that kingdom of heaven. We're to embody peace, to embody loving our neighbor. and that sometimes forgetting is a real problem. The second reason that I think some of us fall away from our healing, from following Jesus, is that we're so fearful. Our fears are private, but our fears are public too. And some of our fears are well-based. Having lived in a Jerusalem that was occupied, some of our fears are very, very real. Suffering happens. Certainly following in Jesus' way, he didn't avoid it, but he knew how to live through it. By staying, by abiding in God. And so that's my study. That's been my life practice since then, is how do we continue to abide? How do we continue to have this awareness around us? Well, Jesus himself gave us the answer. When you study what he did in his practices, his time alone with God, his stillness, the solitude, the prayers, the fellowship, the laughter, the parties, all of it. Doesn't all of it belong? We don't get the joy, we don't get the love without the suffering. So if you're like me, you wonder, how do we keep that vibrancy? How do we keep being able to be good in a crisis? How do we become helpers? How do we become peacekeepers? I think we start with doing what Jesus did, which is living out his word. That's what I meditate on. That's what I ponder on. That's how I spend my days. I asked my friends, well, is there anything else I should tell them that they should know about me? And they says, well, you might not like this very much, but you talk about Jesus all the time. We can't do anything without you talking about Jesus. We can't come to you asking you to help us with something without you telling us a Jesus story. It's a little much, Mary. And I do take that to heart. I'm both grateful that I'm a little much. I think Jesus was a little much too. And so I'm hopeful that of all of us, at the end of our days here on earth, that when people describe us or ask us to tell them about our own journeys, that we can talk about with reverence and with peace that we were followers of Jesus and that we were all a little much. Hodu Adonai Kito.